Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, cool. Hang out with a mic, that's old school. That's cool. Very cool. So thank you very much. How exciting to be up here, to have almost a vision, a dream come true, right? So for those who don't know, John Millam is my name. So, and I haven't been a Christian forever. It's about 5-6 years now. So I was a late bloomer. And it was interesting because I attended church. It was a beautiful church. But you guys might know, if you've been a Christian a long time, the process of selecting a church, right? So you maybe have moved countries and had that experience, right? But when you're a non-Christian, you're actually quite ignorant about the culture. You walk in, and the very first thing you do is you see the person at the front, and you get a sense that you're wanted or you're not wanted. And I found a beautiful church, and I remember being inspired at that time because like everything was new and wonderful. And I'm going, is that spirit? Can I feel that? So, I thought, I was sort of full of spirit that day. And the pastor came up and he goes, how was that? As someone brand new. And I go, that was amazing. That was really good. I was full of spirit, and I had a bit of a, I don't know what you call it, vision, something, and I thought I liked the view from where you were standing, right? And he looked at me and he goes, probably leave it longer than a month, mate. So it's taken me about 6 years, right, before that comes true. So bear with me, but this is exciting to me. Today it's an interesting day because it's kind of a grave day in many ways, right? It's got a gravitas to it. But there's also joy. And I hope to take us on a little journey today where we honour the seriousness of the day. But we also experience some of what is really joyful about it. And many of us have already been in a service this morning, or at least spent some time thinking about the meaning of today. So many of us are here in church after having an Anzac Day experience. Maybe you marked it by attending a church or watching a service. Maybe you got up early and went to a dawn service in a local cenotaph or in town. That'd be awesome if you did. Or maybe you marked it in another personal way. Were you like me last year, moved when you went down to your end of your driveway and just saw Australians in their street, noting what is a complex thing, Anzac Day. And it must be amazing, right? It's wonderful to hear the complexity of this in your stories, right? The stories where we give up those with light and love in our lives, and they give up and go off to make sacrifice in service, right? So most of us would have paused or thought about the day in some way, and maybe we noted the loss of people in our lives, the going out of their light. Maybe we thought of people close to us who are serving now. Maybe we have people who are serving. I know I have the sons now of my friends are serving. Maybe we remembered those we knew or loved who have gone from us in recent conflicts, not just the Anzacs, of the past. Maybe we felt sadness, or we recall the loss that it meant to us, to our personal loss, and also the loss to our country and our community. Some of our finest and brightest no longer there to feed and grow our nation. But maybe we had a moment of gratitude. Maybe you felt like thanking and praising them for their sacrifice, for the courage and service they showed, right? For what they gave up in service to us. maybe that came over you. Maybe you realised the gravity of their choice. And particularly the noted, the men who laid down their lives in various ways across all of the conflicts that we know Australia's been involved in, and other places. So, and I know, Gillian, slide 1, I haven't got that secret sign worked out yet, so I just need to be straightforward. So this is my favourite icon of Gallipoli. Everyone would probably know Simpson and his donkey, of course. So John Simpson Kirkpatrick he was a British person who signed up and came ashore at Gallipoli on Anzac Day, and he served in the ambulance corps, and his job became taking wounded from the front lines on the escarpment down to the beach and casualty stations. And he did that famously by enlisting a local donkey. I think the donkey was called Abdul, or also I think the second donkey might have been Murphy. I don't know. His service, his tireless, brave service. On the escarpment, there were areas that were enfiladed, that were visible to the enemy, and they were under fire. And we know the story. He would walk down that alley with his donkey and his wounded. It was called Machine Gun Alley. And he did it time and time again, saved tens of individuals. And as a kid, that story was it was apocryphal. It was like mythical to me. But it also gave me a sense of who I was, right? And what kind of, and the question, would I make this a choice? Here's a man who made a choice constantly. It wasn't like one act of bravery. It was an act every time he went up and down the hill. And I go, what? I could maybe contemplate on the rugby field. I've probably pulled off one or two acts of bravery individually, right? But to constantly, it was a different motivation to put your slouch hat back on and grab your donkey's reins and walk back up the hill in harm's way. It's been such an iconic gesture that it's become part of our law. So, all of us understand Simpson and his donkey, whether we live up to it or not. So, today on my mind, as I got up this morning and looked at the posts of people who commemorated Anzac Day with their own personal message, I also thought, and strangely for me, Anzac and Easter are very closely related in my mind. And I thought about that this morning. It's close in date, but it's also close for me, it's close in my mind. I seem to have them related. And I wondered about that this morning. So on a day like today, we hear so much about the word sacrifice and courage, and how we take today as a moment to commemorate sacrifice and courage. And I wonder, do we truly understand what motivated the men like Simpson and like our relatives and many other stories? Do we truly understand what motivated them to display sacrifice and courage? And I think of Easter as helping to unlock that meaning for me and hopefully for us. So let's explore that a little bit today. And I'd like to explore that by proposing that Easter and the Anzac tradition resonate with us in the same way. It's a reasonable position to talk about the evils of war and to talk about the horror of the cross. It's a reasonable thing to want to avoid that, to avoid the tragedy of losing our perfect Saviour, but also losing these fine men, the men that we've lost in across the years. And we nowadays, after a sort of relatively long period of peace, almost peace, we understand that there are other ways. We want our leaders to choose other ways. But we think humanity should take priority over international conflicts and the choices of nations nowadays. And I believe that Anzac is also talking about that. Jesus at Easter is also talking about that his sacrifice, like theirs, has demonstrated to us that humanity should take priority over whatever agenda we have outside of those motivations. So the piece, actually it's 1 John. I have already, I'll admit that mistake. So this is 1 John, which is fascinating. I love the similarity between 1 John 3:16 and John 3:16. Was that on purpose? I guess everything's on purpose. I'll have to ask my next theology teacher about that. So, by this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. And we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. By our deeds we are measured in love. That is an extraordinary verse, because it is Anzac and Easter, right? And it does it with such humility, and yet it's asking so much of us, right? And it's interesting, because if we take inspiration from the Anzac tradition, then we acknowledge how much they gave, how much they were asked and succeeded in giving, and now we have so much asked of us. Is there anything else that we can do but explore how to give, like the Anzacs did? How can we sacrifice in our world? Because I believe both the Bible and Jesus' modelling of sacrifice and the Anzacs and the way we revere and understand that it's something special is ultimately inspired by love. And that's where the joy comes to combat the sadness of this day. Because love and service is an antidote to sadness. I would agree totally with the need to remember the service and sacrifice of our armed forces and first responders and all those involved. I would agree that we need to actually embrace the accepting of their gifts, the gifts that these people have given us, and to thank them. Not just remember them, but actively thank them wholeheartedly and without reservation. And yet today, I think we can go even a little further than that when we can consider the meaning of loss and sacrifice. I think we can consider more on the generosity of those people, of these men and women who faced and suffered death and gave us the chance to learn from their love, and how that their love can be demonstrated in war. Can you think about it? If you think of a man standing in the trenches, we know that image of the trenches, like Greg mentioned the Western Front. We've got that image locked in. It's foul, it stinks, it's muddy, it's dirty, it's dangerous. Around it is death. Over the top is certain death almost. And yet men, when the whistle blew, stepped up to the stairs and they went over. And I'm asking, why? Did they go because they were afraid? Did they go because they felt they had no other choice? Or did they go because the man next to them was their brother? Did they go because they'd made a commitment to service? Did they go because they loved the men around them? That's what I believe. Australians commemorate Gallipoli, which is normally considered a tactical and strategic defeat by experts, right? And it's not the same as the rest of the world. They celebrate victories. And yet, it makes perfect sense to me because we focus on the men here. We don't celebrate the victory of nations. We celebrate the victory of spirit. We, in the midst of what could only be considered unconscionable conduct, we celebrate the triumph of their love for each other and their love for our way of life, their love for their values. And we celebrate the highest expression of that in sacrifice. Does that make sense? So, and what I love about this is that on any other day you can look at these men and they're fine men, they're good men. They're men with people who love them, and some of them have a history, some of them are rascals, some of them are saints, right? It's just a typical Australian group of men. And yet on another day, instead of being instruments of war and death, they become that much higher. They become a symbol to all of us of what we can attain when we bring love into the front of every decision we make. So it's how in this willingness to choose love over life that we find inspiration, not because he's a victim. They're far from victims. Not because they're forced to, but because they chose to stay true, as we said, for the love of their brothers. In Greek, right, so I've used love a lot, right? I have to say love, that's our word. But Greek have 7 words for them. I'm sure you've heard that before, haven't you? You heard 7 words? You know them? No? Sorry? Agape, that's right. So that's the love we're talking about today. So philia and agape, right? I'm sure many of us know eros, right? Or we have to, storge, we have to do what our Father says. But agape is a universal. It's a higher expression of love. It's love God has for us. Agape drives Jesus on the cross, where he says, why have you put this burden on me? But he's still in service and in love for the task God has given him. He's stays there, endures that, and demonstrates the greatest sacrifice. Right? So when we take these ideas of love, when we have this capacity for nuance, right, we get a sense that love can be bigger, that love can be more significant, more complex, almost more worthy than just the way we normally think of love every day, right? Last night my daughter brought home a gelato. That's a confession. Is this do we do confession in this? Can you absolve me? That Colorado gelato shop really good, and that gelato was outstanding, right? But really? Love of ice cream, and we're talking about this? It's not enough, right? We need to adopt the Greek, right? And when we give love this level of attention, when we accept the need to be more complex and more significant, right, it starts to make sense at a gut level. You guys know what I'm talking about, not because of your hearing, but because you're feeling. right? So when last post goes, I don't care if it's a tape or if it's a young boy playing it on a driveway or if it's played by a master sergeant at arms. It does the same thing to me. It gets me at a gut level. As a young man, I wanted to sign up. As an old man, I almost regretted not being able to sacrifice the way. So it's the love that hits me. And it's like, if you're fair dinkum, I think, at that time, it's not something away or distant. It's something real and close. That's what I love about Anzac Day. It's not about war. It's about service. And how bleeding marvellous it was to see that highest expression. And the love that hits me when I think about Anzac Day also opens up the marvel of Jesus' sacrifice for me. Because that is an extraordinary thing. Fancy God taught, like I imagine there's kind of a difficult dialogue, right? I don't know, you're like, Jesus, come into the office, will you, mate? I've got to ask you to become man, cop all of that hassle, hang out with people who won't appreciate you, will ultimately torture and kill you. Oh, okay, sounds like something. What's that for? Because I want you to save the world. Doesn't sound like a good deal. Don't mean to be flippant, but really, that's amazing. And then he doesn't just do it for one-off. It's not that moment of bravery or courage. It's a pathway to him. He gives us a promise of eternally getting us off the hook. That sacrifice is massive because the job was massive. I know I've been grateful because I'd have probably more than gelato to confess. So knowing that that was the road he walked in service to me and us, it's mind-blowing. Sometimes it's too mind-blowing. So I have to go to Romans 12:1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Now, faced with that request, I would be overwhelmed. Like I could imagine the crews rowing into the cove at Anzac Day. But thankfully, I'm not on my own. He doesn't leave me on a beach in fire. He says, no, I'll take the hit. I'll be in the first wave. And your pathway to victory is easy, unlike these men. Danny Silk, the American pastor, talks about acting with honour and courage, to choose love over fear. And those two events, Easter and Anzac Day, are exactly an exposition of love over fear. He describes every choice as a fear choice or a love choice. And this rings true for me. Think about it. Think of a line you draw from one side to the other, and fear's at one end and love is at the other. And think about every decision you make being somewhere along that line. As you contemplate that in your head, where are your choices? And do you get a sense of what's different? Think of a choice maybe down this end and how it was your agenda. Maybe you were choosing to be safe. Maybe you were choosing to hang on to something you valued. Maybe you thought it was a good thing, but you hadn't consulted. And now think of a choice you make down this end. Think of how you gave, how you made a choice that wasn't your agenda, it was benefiting someone else. Think of how a choice you made helped the community or somebody, and you weren't getting anything back for it. And how did that feel? So this choice, right, I believe Jesus wants us to make. I think I think there must be a parable where there's a lion and fears at one end, and I'll just need to do my research. But I think he wants us to continually push up that line. That the choice is not choosing one or the other, because I think the opposite of this is actually indifference. Let go of Jesus and you don't care what choice you make. You can make a fear choice or a love choice. The only person you are holding to is your own agenda, right? And that's indifference. The world around me is feeding me, and I don't care if I give it something back. But Jesus wants us more from us. He wants us to model his sacrifice and his service. And if we follow him, we step up to that. We're on the boat leading into the Anzac Cove. So when Anzacs charged to the cove, they knew fear. They knew huge fear in the face of deadly force and hopeless tasks. And one of the reasons today is so special is because we see that effort, how hard it is. We see the fear and we stand inspired and humbled by those choices that these extraordinary, ordinary men made to keep going, to serve their country and to put themselves in service to their brothers. I see agape and philia in action. And for me, it changes things. I was lucky enough to, quick aside, I was lucky enough to spend 5 years ago, I think 2015, 6 years ago, Anzac Day was 100 years commemoration. And I was in a surf boat along with 100 other surf boats, and we did a recreation commemorating the landing at Anzac Day at the same time as the first boats landed at the beach in Anzac Cove. We landed at Collaroy, right? Wave after wave of surf boats. Now, it's ridiculous to equate the two, and yet coming in the middle of those waves and hitting the beach and people running around and thousands of people on the foreshore and the urgency of getting the boat up and being in place and having marshals glaring and yelling at you. It's not a bullet or a shell, but it was just that little bit of moment. I was so unexpectedly overcome with emotion. I got a tiny, itsy-bitsy inkling of what those men faced. And I was overwhelmed in my situation, right? Being in Collaroy, where I was, 10 minutes away from a hamburger and a beer. And a gelato. Wasn't around then. So that humble taste caught me. The emotion caught me. And ever since then, the hustle and bustle, just that tiniest inkling, I understood a little bit of the danger they faced. And it gave me a little bit of understanding at their choice, at the overwhelming courage of their choice. And I got it. I don't think it's courage, right, that is the most important thing. I realised that they were in service, right? And they were the highest, most amazing expression of that service that I could call on. And I love that Romans quote. What have I got up here? Right. I've got Danny Silk. There's another Romans quote. I don't think it's on the books, on these slides. But it says, owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word. You shall love your neighbour as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbour, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. And I think that is what we're talking about, what we need to recognise out of Anzac Day. That loving our neighbour is literally starts with loving your brother. Is it easy to love your mum and dad and family? I guess in most cases it is. Is it harder to love the people you know around you, your church family? It's harder, but it's still relatively easy. Maybe we can love a neighbour, sure. But there are hard choices in love. And I think we're being tasked to step up to those hard choices. What do you need to step up to them? And I can see plenty of hard choices around. What about parenting? As a church and a community, how do we feel about making actions match our love for our kids? If you're a father, is it more important for you to be there or to provide for them? That's a love choice. Is it important to ask ourselves, are we telling our kids things because it's convenient? Is it easy for us? Is it a way of controlling them? Or is it because we want the best for them? What about work? Boss, employee, colleagues? Are you choosing to honour the gifts of your employment, of the things that gives you in life? Or are you using it for your own ends? Do you reach out to other people, even if it means delaying a journey or going out of your way? I'm sure many in this congregation do. But is it about others or is it about our own agenda? Right? We're constantly asked that. That's the tough decisions. Hospitality. How hard is it, to stretch your food to cover someone else? Right? How hard is it to be a host? Is there a hard decision in there? And if you turn away from it, are you turning away from love? A love decision. Charity, serving others through your fruit and harvest. I call it stealing Christmas. Have you ever had that feeling? Right? Where you give, you feel like you give something and people just accept it. They don't thank you and they just go, oh, I don't want to give them anything back. Right? But that's not what it's about. That's a hard decision. It's easy to give when someone is profuse in their thanks. But it's hard to give it just because that's being of service, that's fulfilling the law. So, how do you choose love for your friends and partners? Serving their needs before your own. What do we got? Next one. There we go. Well, here's a couple of hints. As we ask questions like, is there someone out there you're having trouble loving? Right? Is there someone, a friend, a family, a neighbour? Maybe I'd like to help you. And this is my mindset trick. Right? So I'm offering this, and please feel free to ignore it. I love grace. By grace, I solve my problems. I use the term grace every chance I get, and it's really fun to make up the GRACE for every different situation. For sacrifice and service, this is my grace. So gratefulness. I can't see anyone loving without the ability to recognise a gift. Love the giver by honouring the gift. That's my phrase. I can't see anyone being able to be truly loving without having a real commitment to serving others without my agenda being necessarily on top. And not only that, real service is joyful service. So I challenge you to put out with joy. I find it almost unbelievable that anyone tries to love without acceptance. I think Neil Young says it's all the freaky people that make the beauty of the world. And I wonder if Jesus saw that. Did he go, you're clever, I'm sacrificing for you, you're ugly? No, or you're quirky, or you're from a race I don't know. I don't think he did that. In fact, I know he said the opposite. And that's acceptance. And of course, we speak about courage, but what is courage? It's fear walking, it's all of those things. But what it really is believing that whatever comes your way, you have the resource to manage. Now, is there a better definition for faith? Whatever I'm going to have, whether it's bullet or bad curry, right? I'll be able to survive it because I walk in kingdom, right? He's here. He's sacrificed for me. The least I could do is be bold enough to take a few steps out of my comfort zone to accept, to honour that gift. And of course, empathy. How can you love someone if you can't walk a moment in their shoes? What an amazing gift we've been given. Jesus gave us a thing called mirror neurons, right? They're a bit of neuroscience with your religion today. Mirror neurons are things that fire in response to other people's emotions, to give you a sense, the capacity, if you're willing to have a bit of faith in that science, are willing to experience something of what other people are going through. And that changes everything. I was here's another confession, just before I finish up. I was a Premier League road rager, right? I could not believe most of the population got their licence. They were just atrocious. Right. Thankfully, I was a very good driver. I think we've already heard that today. A very good driver. But like the suffering I was put under on the roads by people. Right? And it was my job as an evangelical road rager to tell them just how big the gap was between them and the next level, right? Sometimes I did it relatively calmly, and most times I did it another way. So when I decided, because of various epiphanies in my life and because of the influence, when you accept Jesus, you have your DNA changed, right? So suddenly things need to be done. You have some growing to do, right? I decided I'd fix that, and wasn't that a journey? But what I found really, really effective was I would say, I know I've got a mother like that. If you're late, you're in trouble. Or, yes, I know what it's like to be running half an hour late to pick up your daughter. I can see why you would want to cut in front of me. And when I started to give them a little bit of me and walk in their shoes, I started to be a little calmer. So much so that my daughter one day, I must have lost it. I must have been weak and emotional. And someone did a road rage warranting thing. And I said something and she goes, "Wow, Dad, I just realised that's the first I've heard of you in a number of trips. Well done," right? So I just thought, listening to that good advice, being in service and understanding a grace mindset not only helped me get from A to B without a heart attack, it also helped me model that for my daughter. And I just went, praise Jesus, because he inspired me, and in some small way I get to maybe inspire someone else. And I think that is why Easter and Anzac Day resonates for me, and why I choose service and why I choose love as often as I possibly can. So it's in the inspiration of sacrifice, service and love by people such as Anzac, and of course our Lord and Saviour, of course, is the ultimate authority of loving service. And I love that he is guiding my path and leading my way. And lest we forget. Thank you.